This is Global Forum TV. In our new series today, India 2025, we bring you eminent personalities from India and share their vision, comments and opinions about what India would look like in 2025. This is your host, Ameena Saeed.
The mantra to understand India is Gandhi. Once you understand Gandhi, then you know the way out is there.
If you are going to promote chauvinism of the majority, or what I call chauvinism of the majority, either through the BJP, the opposition Bharatiya Janata Party, or otherwise through one of its ancillaries of what is called the Sangh Parivar, you're going to atomize the Indian political scene.
Rift is going to be China.
Okay.
India will become, as far as some of the core issues of the world are concerned, the global laboratory. Income inequalities have never been more explosive than they are today. I mean, you know, it's always been an unequal and hierarchical society.
India is a very stabilizing force. Indian history, Indian culture, and Indian population, the Indian immigrants abroad, all this shows that India is an extraordinarily stabilizing force with the capacity for integration.
The whole world is looking at India as the future of this entire globe.
A great country, a proud country, but a country which under capitalism is unfortunately very much unequal. A country in which a part is the urban India and the rest is rural Bharat.
Hi, this is Global Forum TV. Global Forum TV, a platform for global issues with global perspectives in today's global village. We continue in our series to India 2025, where we bring you eminent personalities from India to share their vision, their opinion, their comments about India in 2025. Today we have with us one such person. His name is Ashis Nandi. Mr. Nandy, thank you very much for being with us. Mr. Nandy, a little bit about Mr. Nandy. He is first and foremost described as a dissent, which means he has trained himself to think outside the box, which has introduced a certain originality to his approach. He is an author, theoretician, and a philosopher in the Gandhian tradition. Professionally, he is known as a political psychologist and sociologist of science who works at the Center for the Cultures of Knowledge, Vision, and Dialogue of Civilization. The Indian Express described him as perhaps the most notable dissenting voice of our time and continues about him. He believes that the idea of nation state has led to more bloodbath and genocide in the 20th century than both the world wars put together. For him, India and Pakistan are a prime example of how costly the Western idea of nation state has been for the human race. He received the Fukuoka Asian Culture Award in 2007. He has written or edited more than a dozen books, which include such celebrated titles as The Intimate Enemy, Loss and Recovery of Self Under Colonialism, Science, Hegemony and Violence, A Requiem for Modernity, Tradition, Tyranny and Utopias, Essays in Political Awareness, Ram Janambhoomi Movement and Fear of the Self. Welcome, Mr. Nandy, to Global Forum. It is good to have you here. Thank you. What is a political psychologist?
I think those who study the psychological sources of political actions or choices, and those who study perhaps also the way politics of psychology itself influences our understanding of the psychology of politics.
Okay. Yeah.
Too complicated.
All right. Okay. Okay. The second question I have is about your book, Ram Janambhoomi Movement, Fear of the Self. I'm intrigued. How can the majority have a fear of itself?
Fear of the self is not confined to minorities. Okay. There are many majorities in the world which perpetually feel insecure. I am presently writing the foreword to an Australian book on Australian problems, and I am astonished by the extent to which Australia seems insecure about its self-definition. White Australia.
White Australia.
In fact, they seem more insecure about themselves than the Australian Aborigines are,
Wow.
or the
Wow.
immigrants are.
Amazing.
And I mean, there is no guarantee that majority will give you confidence. I think the RSS is born, for instance, out of a minority complex. It thrives on the sense of being a minority in a section of urban, modernized Hindus.
How do you see India today in the global sense?
I think India has made it by the standards of the globalized world. What you see are the deficiencies will be taken care of within a very short period of time. So I have no objections to that. I cannot fault India on that. But I have my doubts how far a civilization, as opposed to a nation state, can go by other people's ideas of what is good and bad, and what is a good society and what is a bad society. That must evolve from within the society, and that cannot be defined by any section of Indians. That can be only defined democratically through the participation of all kinds of Indians, whether in the majority or minority, whether they speak our national language or do not, whether they belong to the literate class and caste, or they do not.
What is India's globalization strategy for 2025? And where do you see India in 2025?
I do not know about the globalization strategy of India. I am not the right person to answer that question. All I can say is this, that India's globalization strategy is not particularly different from the globalization strategy of many other globalizing societies, including those in East and Southeast Asia.
Where will India be in 2025 in relation to global powers and regional powers?
I think it will become a powerful country. It will become a country not only having economic might, but also nuclear might. And I'm afraid it will be some kind of a mimicry of some of the global powers who are not at the top rung of the ladder. Something like some of the European states, or maybe even China up to a point.
If we were to assume that by 2025, India, China, Russia, Japan, European Union and USA will be the centers of power, what kind of rifts and alliances do you see between these countries?
I do not see much of a rift. If once India globalizes, there is not much of a rift between China and them either. There is competition, rivalry, but that's not a rift, really speaking. There is not much of an rift as far as economic ideology goes between China and India anymore. There is a rift about political ideology. China is not a democracy. In many respects, it is a police state, and the apologists of China forget that in India, and to that extent India is better off. But China probably will be more successful as an economic power, because I do believe that development has a built-in code of authoritarianism within it. All countries which have developed spectacularly has shown authoritarian streaks, whether it was the East Asian giants or the Southeast Asian ones, whether it was Europe, which had a colonial past. If you don't have an authoritarian, open authoritarian past, you have to have a colonial past.
What issues will define the relationship between these countries and India? Will it be water, oil, markets, population, etc., or something else?
Well, I cannot really give you a considered answer to this, but I think water will be a crucial one on which there will be conflict. Oil also perhaps, because this is a country of 1 billion and so is China, and entry of 2 billion of people into the market for oil makes absolutely sure that there will be enormous conflicts and rivalry centering around oil. And my suspicion is this, that this conflict and rivalry will in deep sense hamper India and China in their quest for new status as a global power, because even our military machines are heavily dependent on oil. Right. And while you can monopolize oil to some extent, you cannot create oil mechanically. Okay. We have to depend on the existing oil supplies.
What will be India's major strength in the global village?
I think it's democracy, particularly the sheer diversity of the cultures it represents. Whatever you do, the fact remains that in India so many experiments in lifestyle, in visions of life, in wellness, in well-being are being tried out by so many groups of people, not because they are trying, but they live their different lives in their own way, following sometimes traditions, borrowing something from modernity, borrowing from other regional and all local cultures. And this very diversity, the very fact that there are so many kinds of Indians, so many communities which are trying to adjust to some of the common issues of humankind, I think that sense of experimentation and the capacity of the Indian system to ensure and live with that diversity almost by default has ensured a very interesting role for India. India will become, as far as some of the core issues of the world are concerned, the global laboratory where you experiment with differences.
Peter Schwartz talks about inevitable surprises. What do you think India's surprise will be in 2025?
I think the decline of Indian population. After spending decades on lamenting India's population growth rate, India might suddenly find that its diminishing birth rate poses a different kind of economic problems in terms of cheap labor and in terms of the outsourcing that is going on in the global economy.
Despite the fact that India has a burgeoning, large, developing middle class, there is an equally sizable underclass. Where do you see that underclass in 2025?
Well, that brings me to an altogether different story. Everything said, I am not a person who admires either globalization or thinks that globalization is the last word in human welfare. I do see that by the year 2025, a sizable number of communities in India, perhaps adding up to something like 8 to 10% of the Indian population, will face extinction through the fact that they cannot be integrated within the global economy or the market economy for that matter, and they will be left out in the cold. They will be pushed towards extinction, I should say, and I think a lot of Indians will pretend or at least like to believe that they deserve to be extinct.
Okay. That brings me actually to the first part of the question. Do you really believe there is a 300 million strong middle class in India?
No, I don't believe it is that large, but I think if you go by middle class values, and I'm a psychologist, I go by mainly by that, not by income. Right. I would say roughly 300 million people are exposed to middle class values, middle class culture, middle class lifestyle. They know what it is, and even if they are not entirely a part of it, they are a part of the media world. In that sense, yes, perhaps.
Okay, because I have another person who said he goes by how many people own cars. So only 7% of Indians own cars, so he considers 7% of Indians to be middle class, which is 70 million.
What about the millions of Indians who have one relative either in West Asia or in first world? They don't have cars, but they are, ready-made income, and it's a middle class income level.
Okay, so there are various divisions and various phases, layers of Indian middle class. Which elements of India's soft and smart power do you see contributing to its rise to superpowerdom?
Its diversity and its tolerance, which is under jeopardy now, because the nation state always encourages monolithic cultures. Nation state always looks down upon issues which seem to divide the people. Actually, what they think might stand in the way of India's progress are exactly the thing which has enriched India over the centuries, which has given us our viability and our soft power. It is that diversity, the very fact that we can live with so many people, not often with fraternal feelings, not often with fraternal sentiments, but we know how to live even when you dislike each other. We know how to if you just don't say coexistence, you can say co-survival. We know how to survive in difficult times with neighbors who are often difficult, often not according to our liking, but Indians are accustomed to the idea that you cannot change your neighbors, that there are neighbors with whom you have lived for centuries, and you know what makes them tick, and they know what makes you tick.
How will the globalization of elites impact the world and India?
I don't think that will impact India's foreign policy that much, except that the old kind of ideological warfare India was expected to wage against imperial power and things like that will go into obsolescence. India will be guided only by national interest, which many people think is a lovely thing. That's what should have been done from the beginning. But well, while India has pursued its national interest, and often ruthlessly so, the fact remains that this national interest was sometimes compromised with because of certain values. I think that will not happen in future. People think to talk of values in the context of international relations is to be romantic and nostalgic, and is ultimately stupid.
So there will be no resistance to imperialism or imperial...
I mean, that's not the category they will use. Exactly as they are made up with the Russian, not Russian, I mean made up with the, exactly as they are made up with the Burmese junta, similarly they will make up with anybody who serves Indian national interest. They are not concerned with political values.
To what extent India's internal fault lines of caste, region, religion and abject poverty impact India?
It doesn't diminish India's role as a superpower an iota. If at all we presume that India is going to be a superpower, I think it's going to be a subaltern superpower. But that's a different story. It won't, because I don't think global system is organized around values. It is organized around national interests and nation states. And in this kind of a system, in neither India's poverty will matter an iota, nor India's human rights records, or India's relationship with its neighbors.
You said it will not be a superpower, but it will be a...
Subaltern superpower, by which I meant something like one of the European countries, or perhaps Brazil.
Okay. What are the best or worst case scenario for India in 2025?
The best case scenario is this, that India, after acquiring this economic might and after being wooed by the developed world, decides to build directly a more human society and gives up the big power by the conventional definition of being a big power. The best that can happen to India is that India decides to pursue a slightly more modest role in the context of power politics and slightly more ambitious role in the context of human politics. That's the best best scenario. The worst scenario is this, that India, with this is growing power, its growing ability to flout international opinion as well as the opinion of its own intelligentsia, will go and become more and more a closed society, trying to control its education, which it already does. India is an authoritarian system as far as educational sector goes, controlling its press and media, which it's trying to do now without not much of a success, but it's trying all the same. And continuously go on abridging the area of freedom within India for Indians. I am sure it will lead to some degree of backlash, but I think this is not unknown in the history of developing societies. They do want to develop, and an authoritarian regime in a developing society always has a slight advantage over freer societies in growth rate and things like that.
What are the worst or best case scenario for India in the sense of global North-South relationship, and what are the implications for India?
I think the best scenario is that there will be a more plural world. The North-South divide might remain, but it will become less possible for the North to dominate in the blatant manner that they do now. And the worst scenario is this, that the income disparities will widen so much that much of the South will lose the self-confidence of devising or envisioning their own future in their own way, and try to be second-hand versions of the North, which is, by the way, which is a self-defeating venture.
What kind of relationship do you see between India and Pakistan in 2025, and what will be the shape of South Asia to come?
I am a little bit more hopeful. Anything that is maudlin or theatrical has gone out of fashion in films for decades. But Shakespeare was maudlin at many places. He was theatrical, overly dramatic, theatrical in many of his plays, in many places. So that those needs of the people to have that kind of sentiments represented in works of art has not gone. Only the fashions have changed. And the role which Indian film industry played by catering to these unfulfilled desires in many parts of the world was, for example, say protecting family values, or the idea of filial piety, or how should I put it, marriages are made in heaven kind of themes. These are going out of Indian films, and you can read it either way. You can say that we are joining the world, or you can say that we are withdrawing our wares from the world and producing the wares the world wants.
What three words will you use to describe India as you see it today?
Culturally immensely rich, as a nation state, a mimic state and a theatre state to some extent, and intellectually a split personality which wants to join the world but cannot do so in its own terms, and has to create a situation where at least some of its concerns are reflected in the global arena.
What three words will you use to describe India as you would like to see in 2025?
I think I will opt for what Gandhi once said in different words. I think if we can remove absolute poverty, destitution, not poverty, because our concept of poverty is elastic. The more rich we become, the more our present life looks poor. You know, I was surprised. All my relatives and friends say that they were very poor earlier. But I know them earlier days also, they were not poor. By today's standard, they feel they're poor, because the concept of poverty has changed. So I'm not talking of that removal of that kind of poverty. I'm talking of removal of destitution, where people are starving to death. I think at least that we should remove by the year 2025, if not earlier.
What else? What two more things you would like to see in 2025, added or removed?
India is one of the most violent and iniquitous societies in the world, but nonetheless it has enormous reservoirs of tolerance and enormous capacity to live with diversities. I will like to believe that the future India, the India I cherish, will use that capacity to open up a different kind of phalanx in the world, open up a different kind of possibilities in the global scene, which is yet to learn that economic development and growth is not the last word in human affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Nandi, Ashis Nandi. That was a pleasure. I hope we'll see you again at Global Forum Television, and congratulations for the award for your book.
Thank you very much.
Yes. This is Global Forum TV, global issues, a platform for global issues with global perspectives in today's global village. Thank you for being with us. Good night.